Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. I also have a podcast where each week I cover another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D. Hello and welcome! Today we're going to go over weight subdivision surface. Last week we had 3D modeled this really cool candy jar with the subdivision surface tool and going through all the settings for it, but there is an additional tool for subdivision surface modeling that we are going over today. So today we are going to be 3D modeling a shark. You may have remembered last week I became really excited that I went to the candy store for inspiration of what to 3D model, and I was really excited that I found these really cool gummy sharks. So I thought they'd be fun to 3D model today to get in some extra practice for when we 3D model with the subdivision surface tool and practice using our weight subdivision surface. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the shark that I had 3D modeled as an example. You can see that's a really lightweight model underneath with the subdivision surface turned off. I also added in this bend deformer just because I thought that would be fun to be able to change the direction of the tail like that. But you can, of course, go all out and rig this shark and give it bones and joints, and I just did this really quick, but you can do something a lot more complicated than the bend deformer if you want to for yours and actually animate this shark swimming. But let's go ahead and talk about this tool that we're going over today. Now, first of all, it's within the mesh modeling menu. It's listed under Add right here as weight subdivision surface, and the reason why we aren't actually seeing this and it's all grayed out is because we need to change modes. And as soon as we change modes, you can now see it listed under the Add and it's no longer grayed out. You can also see the hotkey for it is MR, so remember the hotkey for weight subdivision surface is MR. You can also find this tool over here on the left-hand side when you are in edge mode. You'll see it listed over here. Let's go ahead and open up a new file over here. I'll add in a cube. I'm going to make this cube 3 inches in the Z. And you can really do this in any units you'd like. I just clicked Control D to open up my project manager. You can also do this on a Mac with Command D, and right under scale you'll see we have our project scale set to centimeters. Since I opened up a new project, I want to change this to inches so that that matches what we have within our preferences under units right here, which is inches. So now everything's set to inches, which is good. Now I'll readjust the Z to 3 inches, and I'll change this to 1 inch and 1 inch. And we'll zoom in nice and close here so that we can see our base. I might actually start this off with just 1 by 1 by 1, because we can only stretch this out more as we 3D model. We need to make this cube editable so that when we add the subdivision surface, we can further edit it. And this cube will actually be our cage. We were talking about cages, and they are the low poly model underneath your subdivision surface model. So this will be our cage, and we'll call this shark. We'll hold down Alt while clicking on the subdivision surface, and now it's all rounded out because we added in the subdivision surface, and you can see this even more if we turn on our garage shading lines. That's without the subdivision surface on, that's with it on. You can also turn this on and off with the Q hotkey as a quick reminder. And I'll name this SS Shark. for Subdivision Surface Shark. Now this cage, we aren't going to be able to edit it until we make it editable. So you can do that with the C hotkey or click this button down here in order to make it editable. So now this is a good start. And I'm going to grab this polygon over here, and I'm going to hold down Control, and we're going to extrude this out. I have my 3D modeling reference in front of me of a shark, so this is going to help me 3D model the gummy. It's good to have a reference in front of you for while you work. And then I can scale this in a bit, and we can continue extruding this out if we'd like a little bit. Now I'm just putting in the base shape here, so I'm going to click on these two polygons here. I'm going to hit the T hotkey for scale. I'm going to hold down the Control, and I'm going to drag on this right here so that we're only scaling in one direction, like that. And then I'll do this for up here. I'll use the E hotkey this time and hold down Control and drag this arrow so that we drag this up. So this is starting to look a little bit more like a shark. It's not completely 100% there. We need to add in some loops to this, so I'll use the hotkey ML in order to add in some loops. I'll add one to the center, and then I'll add one here and one here. I'm holding down Shift so that it snaps here to the center when I add in the loops, like that. And I'm going to go ahead and grab these here and just move these a little bit further forward. And I will add in a loop here and a loop here. Just about. And what this will allow us to do is to scale in these points a little bit and then extrude them out so that we have a nice fin here. And maybe I'll rotate this a little bit and move it back. R is for rotate, E is for move. Now I want the shark to be a little bit more rounded, so I'm going to go back into edge mode, and I'm going to select this and select this. And we could further adjust these or even try to remove these. But if we try to remove these, we'll also be removing the fin up here, which we don't want to do. So it's actually easier to adjust this so that's a little bit more rounded by instead going into point mode and manually moving around some of these points so that we get this to look a little bit more like what we'd like it to. So in some ways, the shark is a little bit more complicated than what we were creating before. I'm going to add an ML, and I'm just going to add in this here, this loop right here. And now I can go ahead and grab these points and pull them out a little bit more so that this shark has a little bit of a nose right there. I can scale these in to bring them closer. And I can even do that with these two over here, so that we get a little bit more of a rounded face for the shark. I want to go ahead and grab these points and just drop them down a little bit. I want the tail to be, this fin to be a little bit lower. And I want to go ahead and grab both of these polygons here, and we need to give this shark eyes. So I'm going to use MW in order to inset these two. Click and drag. Now we have eyes here. And now I'm going to hold down T and Control, and I'm going to extrude these in a little bit. So now we have that nice eye shape. If we want to control the weighting of this eye a little bit more, we can do that. So I'll click on this here, and we'll talk a little bit about the weighting for a little bit about the weighting tool. I actually think that these I'd like to be a little bit more rounded, so I'll use the iron tool. And these other tools that I'm using right now, we have covered them in previous episodes. So if you want to check those out, I'll leave links to them in the description below. This podcast does build on itself. Each episode I cover another 3D modeling tool. I do sometimes use in the future lessons as well, or the future episodes rather, because I think it's an easier way to learn is to learn the basic tools first, and then the additional ones after that build on the initial ones you've already learned. So this shark is still missing some fins, so we're going to fix that. I'll go ahead and grab these two polygons here. And I'll grab these two polygons here. I'm going to, actually, I think a better way of doing this would be just to cut another loop in here. And you can see that our loop isn't really going the direction I want it to. It's going through that eye. So I'm going to go in our right view over here. And I'm just going to use the hotkey MK. And I'm going to cut through this entire model like this to create the loop I want. Then I can use MN in order to dissolve those edges. And then if we want to unify these points here, we could do that. I'm going to move our grid for a moment. If we want to combine these 2 points here, we could do that with the weld, and we covered the weld tool. So the hotkey for that is MQ. So even if you change your mind about something later on as you're modeling, if you know all these 3D modeling tools, it's really easy to fix your geometry, like what I'm doing right here. We're removing these n-gons, and they just make for cleaner loops in your model and cleaner geometry. So we're removing the n-gons. We're removing triangles right now. So this is a nice review of all of those initial tools we've gone over. And this is the basic shape of our shark here. And I'm going to go into this top view now because I want to fix this perspective here. Going to click on all these points and hit the T hotkey and scale these on in. So this is our shark gummy. Let's clean this up a little bit with the weight subdivision surface. So we've been 3D modeling with the subdivision surface tool this entire time. We have not weighted anything in here like we did before with the candy jar, because I want to show you another way you can actually go about doing this. So let's go ahead and get started with that. I'm going to use UL in order to select a loop here. But I want to do it actually in edge mode. So I'll select these two loops so that whatever we do on one side, we're also doing on the other side. I'll hit Q again to turn on our subdivision surface. So this is a good start. We definitely want to scale these down a little bit this way and scale them out. But you'll notice that the shape back here doesn't feel really well defined. Now, we could go ahead and add in another loop here, or we could just weight this area so that we have a lower poly model. So I think that's what we're going to do here. So here we are, that's one loop that we need selected. I'm holding down Shift while I find this second loop here. There we go. We have both of our loops selected. I'm going to hide our cage and hit Q again in order to see more of this. Now, I'm hoping you remember that the hotkey for weight subdivision surface is MR. So that'll pull up our settings here. You'll see this has a few settings. We have mode. Set will let you set this to a specific percentage of strength for the weighting. So you can see this is at 100%. I hit set. So now this is a much stronger weighting here than what it was before. If I hit undo and I do that again, maybe you can see it a little bit better. We are setting the weighting for that here. So that's the first mode, is set. You can add and subtract weighting as well. So if I set this to 54% and then click this button, this time we are subtracting 54% of that weighting. So that's how you can adjust that there. You can also add. So we could add this back and now it's adding up to be 100%. You can set both the minimum and maximum that any of your points or edges can be weighted while you're using the tool. So interactive minimum is the minimum amount that you can use, and interactive maximum is the maximum. You can set these and adjust these as you'd like. And you can also adjust this by clicking and dragging your mouse in the viewport, like I'm doing here, and just stop it wherever you feel like this model looks good. So that's another way you can go about it in here. I'm going to select this loop, use the R hotkey. I'm holding down Shift to activate quantize, another tool we've covered in the past. And I'm going to rotate this, snapping in increments of degrees using this. So you could snap this to -15. But I'm thinking I also want to rotate this here. So we're going to snap both of these to about -20 looks good to me. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. You could also do this with the symmetry tool. I haven't covered that yet, so I'm not using it today because I plan on covering it in the future, and I don't want to give you too many new tools to learn all at once. I'll rotate this in about 20 degrees on this side as well. And then I'll just move this in holding down Shift. Or actually, instead of doing it that way, I'm going to just hold down Shift and add in these other edges here, and then use the T hotkey and just scale these in a little bit. So this is looking nicer to me. So I'll activate our weighting tool here, and maybe I want this edge to blend in with the body a little bit more than this edge here. So I reduced the weighting on that edge. So the great thing about this tool is that it's really easy to try out different amounts of weighting to see what you like. So this is looking all right to me. Going to move these points forward a little bit. And as we were talking about before, you can even weight the eyes to make the eyes look the way you want. You could also use this iron tool to round them out a little bit more. I'll use MR again, and we'll just make that a little bit tighter. Select the inside of the eye as well. I'll click Q just to be able to see what's happening a little bit better. I may use the iron tool here to just round that out a little bit more. And now we can try MR again for the weight subdivision surface tool, and we can adjust that there. If you look at these gummy sharks, they actually do have these little eyes 3D modeled onto them. So you can make this as detailed as you want. You can add in fins and things like that as well. You could also do that if you're familiar with texturing by using a normal map. Or something of that sort. I'm going to just pull in these points a little bit more to round this out. We were talking about giving this some fins before I started adjusting other parts of it a little bit more. So let's go back to actually giving this guy some fins. I'll select these on this side. Maybe up a little bit closer. Maybe these two. Look good. And then I'll select these on the side. We'll use the T hotkey again and hold down Control and extrude out these fins. And there we go. These are a little bit big at the end, so I'm going to scale these in a little bit. And then we're just going to push these back. If we want to give these fins some more definition, we can do that again using the Weight Subdivision Surface tool. when you are selecting loops and using that hotkey UL, it's very easy to accidentally select enable axis. I did that for a moment and turned it off again because the hotkey for enable axis is L. So be sure you aren't accidentally turning this on, because that allows you to move your axis rather than selecting that loop. So right now I have that loop selected. I'll hold down Shift and select this loop as well. I used Q to see the low poly version with the subdivision surface off. I'll turn it back on with Q. We'll use the hotkey MR for our weight subdivision surface. I find that easier than going over here and clicking each time. It'll really speed up your workflow. And then I'll click and drag to adjust the weighting once again. So here is our shark. And I think it's looking pretty nice. For a gummy toy we had 3D modeled. Now, just so that you know, the reason why I had created this extra loop in here is if you look at this candy, you'll see that it has this white part on the bottom and then it has this different color on the top. So I did that for texturing purposes for later so that we can texture it. And we'll talk a little bit about subsurface scattering and how to actually have the light scatter throughout the shark when we work in Redshift. So we'll go ahead and do that. So before I finish up this tutorial, I'd like to talk about subsurface scattering. And this is an excellent example here of subsurface scattering. So what is subsurface scattering? Subsurface scattering is when light goes through an object. You'll notice this has a light bulb inside of it. This is actually Himalayan salt. This is a Himalayan salt lamp. So it's completely made out of salt, and it has a light bulb in the bottom, just like that. Feels very salty to hold in my hands. But this is subsurface scattering. The light is going through the salt and scattering throughout, creating this really beautiful orange color. And the light bulb isn't even orange. So we're going to talk about how to create a similar effect inside of Cinema 4D, inside of Redshift with the standard Redshift material. You'll notice that this is also a subsurface scattering type of material, this shark gummy here that we have that we 3D modeled. And if we were to shine a light through it, one moment, let me get the light on my phone actually. If we shine a light on this, you can see that that light is scattering throughout this gummy. That is subsurface scattering. So that is today's science experiment. And now we're going to show how to do it inside of 3D. Here we are inside of Cinema 4D. We have our gummy shark over here that we've been 3D modeling. Quick note that I want to go over that I didn't at the beginning is that I have this bend deformer on the outside of the shark. If you place it inside of the shark, it changes the order of operations. So when the bend deformer is within the cage hierarchy of the shark, you'll see that what is happening first in terms of order of operations is that we are bending the cage, and then the cage is being subdivided in that order. So this is one way of doing it. You can also decide that it makes more sense to you to move the bend outside and have it underneath the shark. So now the bend deformer and the shark are both within the hierarchy of the subdivision surface. So now in this case, first our cage mesh for the shark is being subdivided and then it's being bent. And I kind of like how this looks, so I'm going to keep it like this. It's really personal preference how you want your model to look. It's just something to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and talk about subsurface scattering now. Here we are. So we have our diffuse up here. This is a little bit more of an opaque type of material settings up here. You can think of this as what would adjust plastics and such up here, your base diffuse. But what we're working on today is called subsurface. You can control the weight of the subsurface scattering by adjusting this here. When it's set to 1, this is 100% subsurface scattering material. When it's set to 0, it is 100% diffuse up here. So if you put it somewhere in the middle, oops, I have the wrong weight here. We want to adjust the weight for the subsurface. If I put it somewhere in the middle, you're getting half of that diffuse and half of that subsurface scattering material. We want this at 100% because this shark here, this shark is 100% a subsurface scattering material. Our color here is the subsurface scattering color. That's our main color that we're using today. And I have this nice blue color in here, but you can change it to anything you'd like. You can make a green shark, you can make a yellow shark, orange shark, red shark. Have fun with this. Now it's purple. Okay, I'm going to hit undo and get us back to that blue setting there. And I'll crank this up to 100% weight. We have this other option called radius. So your radius color is when the light goes through and scatters in the object and then comes back to the surface, what color does it show up as? So you can think of this as that color, and the lighter the color, the more subsurface scattering, like that there. It almost looks like a frosty kind of glass or something. And then this is less subsurface scattering when it's a darker color. So we had it somewhere about right here before. So that looks good. And then we have scale. The scale is dependent on your units within Cinema 4D. You can see that within my preferences, I have my units here set to inches. You might have something else, just keep it in mind while you're adjusting that setting. And in my project settings here, project, I have under scale, project scale in inches. And so I have inches there too. These need to match, or else it'll get a little bit confusing. One controls the actual distance inside of Cinema 4D, and then the other one actually controls the label that you see in your settings as you're adjusting them. So just keep in mind to keep these the same so that you don't confuse yourself. And this unit is our unit here. So when this says scale 3, that is 3 inches. That is our distance that the light is going to go and scatter throughout this object. So you can adjust this here, and I'll adjust a little bit of how this looks. It looks different with a shorter distance than with our distance of 3 inches. And the shark is about 3 inches, so it seemed like a fitting amount to me. We have anisotropy. Anisotropy is the angle in which the light scatters within the object. So right now I have mine at negative 0.084. As we adjust this, you'll see it slowly changes how it looks as it's scattering throughout, because it is changing that direction. I'll set this back to something like that for right now. We have different modes for our subsurface scattering. Random walk is what I have mine set to right now. It takes the longest amount of time to render. It is the most accurate. So those are the pros and cons of it. It takes the longest amount of time to render. It's the most accurate, and it works with the progressive renderer. We have other options too here, like ray trace diffusion. This one looks very similar to point-based diffusion. Both of these are less accurate than the random walk. Point-based diffusion is the least accurate. It is also the fastest to render. It doesn't work with progressive rendering. So let's try ray trace diffusion. Ray trace diffusion is a little bit more accurate. It takes a little bit longer than point-based diffusion, but it's a little bit faster than random walk. And ray trace diffusion works with the progressive renderer, and we have the progressive renderer running right now with the IPR. I'll set this back to random walk because I like this to be more accurate even if it takes more time to render. But this is a personal preference, and you can do what fits your project at the time. You know what kind of time crunch you are for rendering. You can adjust your samples manually. You'll see within your render settings that you can choose to have automatic sampling. If you turn this off though and uncheck this checkbox here, you can adjust your samples manually for subdivision surface in this particular material right over here. You have the option to include all objects in the subsurface scattering, or you can say only scatter based on itself, and it'll only take that into account while calculating those subsurface scattering bounces. So you have that as an option as well. That covers our subsurface scattering options for our redshift standard material, and you can of course render your shark in any render you'd like to and get really creative and texture it however you'd like to. Or you could even 3D model something entirely different than a shark using the tools we went over today. I'd love to see what you create. You can share it with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully in the next episode. If you found this helpful, please hit like and subscribe so that you'll be notified when that episode comes out. And I hope to see you there. Thank you so much for taking the time to 3D model with me. I know your time is precious, so if you chose to stick throughout this entire episode, I feel deeply honored. And I look forward to seeing you next time here on Ambient 3D Animations.